Otherwise, let's begin. So why this session is important is because more and more we're seeing reports with numbers. This is the value of this ecosystem, or this is the value of mangroves, coral reef, seagrass. What we will talk about is what does that mean when they say uang rupiah, mangrove, what does it actually mean? So in the next slide, we will look over 4 topics. Why do we need monetary valuation? What are the considerations, number 2, of valuation? 3, why we need accounting? And then 4, 2 examples of ecosystem valuation. Okay, next slide. When you talk to Bappenas, when you talk to Ministry of Finance, you give them values in money. If you give them a picture of a mangrove, maybe they will become confused. Yes? We do monetary valuation so that we can communicate better. But it needs to be meaningful. The value that you give needs to be a way that you can use those values to guide choices. And as our resident economist here in the crowd, because we have, back one, yeah, back one. We have limited resources, yeah? Economics, limited resources. So now we can go. So maybe a lot of people here have a motor. No? So the valuation, it's about converting one thing to another. You turn your motor into rupiah. When you value mangroves, you're saying, I will remove all the mangroves and I turn that into money. This is something people forget because they want a big number. But what we want better is a useful number. We don't want to remove all the mangroves in Indonesia. So why would we put one value for all the mangroves in Indonesia? So when you have a scooter, you only get the money when you sell it. So if you sell your bike, you have your money, but you no longer have your bike. You cannot have both. That's why it's better to have a useful number than a big number. Next. We can convert ecosystems, change the land use. So for example, from forest to oil palm, and that produces money. We can also start thinking of this in terms of ecosystems. In many places, instead of a mangrove, we have a seawall. This protection from the mangrove is replaced by the seawall in some cases. So, when we value the mangrove, we think of it as how much would we have to pay if we had to have a seawall instead? Yeah? So this is very specific for an area, for the context, not just one big number for all of Indonesia. Next. We understand that these ecosystems, they don't do just one thing, they do many things. So mangrove, how much fish you catch, it can increase. We heard about blue carbon this morning. Also, coastal protection, which we might see in the ocean calculator later. So it can go to many different benefits that we receive. But also sometimes, once it's gone, it will be very difficult to replace. So for example, if you remove the mangrove in an area where you cannot build a seawall, that's it. You can't put back the seawall and you don't get the value of protection. So you've lost that value. So some ecosystems, not just one value, sometimes we can't replace that value either. So in the next, again, just going through the point, many studies, especially from academia, from universities, we tend to ignore the context, the spatial relationships. So many famous papers, they have one factor, one value for the whole world, for the whole country, or for a whole province. But we always have to ask ourselves, when we get that value, is this true for the specific area? Is this true for Riau? Is this true for another place? What about inside Riau? Does that value change across the coast? And then finally, how can we justify spending money for restoration, for conservation? The value will change across the coast. But that's important so we can know where and when to invest. So not just one value. And to do this, we need to do it spatially. So spatial numbers. Next. So according to the accounting standard, people must benefit. In this framework, people, communities, economy must benefit. So let's take coastal protection, for example. Let's look at that. It's a bit hard to see, but let's look at this picture here, this one. No house, no fish, shrimp farm, no port. In this framework, there is no coastal protection because it is not protecting anything. Yes? But on the right, you have houses, you have assets. This one, there is coastal protection. So if we take this particular approach, you are no longer allowed to have one value for the whole coastline. You must be specific to where you're accounting for. Okay? So this is one of the biggest differences between accounting and other studies. Other studies, they might use one value for the whole province, for the whole of Indonesia. In accounting, you are not allowed to do that. Okay, so next. Statement 1, okay? Monetary valuation provides meaningful comparisons if we're looking at all the different things received by ecosystems and the relationship is spatial, or it changes across the coast. So remember, mangroves are not just blue carbon, they do more things. So we're looking at all of the different services, and we're also looking at it spatially. Next. So the true value of nature is infinite, right? So without nature, we cannot exist. So next. So there's no point in putting, this is the value of all of mangroves in Indonesia, or all of coral, or all of nature. This is the value of all of nature in Indonesia. Because remember at the start, if I sell my motor, I get money, but no more motor. If I put a value on all of nature, no more nature and money. But then who's left to enjoy the money if everyone is gone? No? So, who benefits if we trade all of the ecosystems in Indonesia for financial money? This is the question you have to ask if you see one big number. Next. So, sorry, one more. Values, one value does not have that much meaning. It's when you have multiple values over time where you understand what's happening. So again, useful numbers are better than big numbers. Maybe somebody's lucky here who only looks at their bank account once in their life. Probably not. You have to look multiple times, no? Because you need to see what's changing, what's going into your bank account and what's leaving your bank account. So looking at the change is why we have a bank account. So we can think of mangroves or coral. Next. What is the difference in the value provided by mangrove or coral across the 2 years? And then next, if you had coral bleaching, or if we cut down all of the mangroves in a particular area, how did that impact the goods and the services that we receive from the mangrove? Okay, next. So, why do we need standards? Next. This is what we saw this morning, where we have the asset, the service, the benefit, and then who benefits in terms of jobs and income, right? We call this, in accounting, the logical chain, the logic chain. Because in accounting, it's strict. We need to get from asset to the benefit, but we have to go through all the different steps. You are not allowed to go from here and then jump straight to the money. You have to do every step. So we get the price of the ecosystem service and we multiply it by the amount of asset we have. So many times you might see in a report one mangrove tree in Indonesia, like $10 maybe. That's not allowed. We have to go through every step. Yep. Okay, so we have 3 different types of services. So next. A few more. Yep. So on the far right, is that penyediaan? Yep. The provisioning. We have, for example, the physical resources, fish, wood. In the middle, we have regulating, things that support a healthy environment. So climate, so carbon, nutrient cycling, preventing erosion, for example, or abrasion. And then finally, we have cultural, so recreational, for example. So some people spend a lot of money, they go to coral reef, they go for tourism. Tourism would be under cultural. So these are the 3 types that we're going to look at. And I might pause here, and then in your same groups, I know it's after lunch, so maybe it's best to stand up and walk around. Just for 10 minutes in your group, I want you to, 1, look for where would money be valuable in communicating your challenge, okay? And then 2, if you have ecosystem services in your challenge, which one, which bucket, which type would they be? Next, please. Okay, so the reason we're doing this, and it got brought up in a few groups, is the importance of these 2 concepts here, welfare and exchange. These are the 2 core concepts of economics for valuation. Welfare is everything. You see, that's why it's a big box. Exchange is only a small part inside of that box. But the green box is what is used to produce GDP. Okay? So the exchange is when, well, I'll explain exchange, but this one, the budaya, is the hardest one to define. We have to be very strict when it comes to accounting. So in the next slide, the reason is because we're using this exchange concept. So in exchange, the ecosystem gives us a good or a service, and the price is that exchange. Yeah? So it's a focus on use values, and it's consistent with GDP. Next. Many examples we heard might fall more into this side. And so this is much broader, socioeconomic. So for example, what was given, the the loss of a cemetery because of abrasion. Yeah? There is no market for cemetery. So we don't put a market price. We don't put a market price on people's, the importance of culture to people, right? It's possible, but not in accounting. In accounting, we live on that side. So, if you think about this plainly, if I think I have more money in my bank account, does it increase? Well, no, because there are very strict rules about money in your bank account. But this one, it looks at subjective values, people's, maybe you've heard of willingness to pay, the willingness to give money, lives in this one. But for us, please remember, we're in the right-hand side. We're on exchange. Next. So, just very quickly, we are using a standard, and the standard says we are using exchange. This is not wrong. You can use welfare when we're trying to look at, for example, a specific path. You're standing at one point in time and you say, should I go here or should I go here? Maybe you can use welfare. But what we're trying to do is look at the change over time, the coastal erosion over time, or the ecosystems over time. This one does not let you look at an analysis over time. If you use this one, you have to repeat everything every year or every time you do your analysis because it cannot be compared over time. Okay? Next. So imagine you have a very nice motor. Okay? The things at the top are considered exchange values. So you have fuel, insurance, registration. You cannot debate these ones. This is what you pay. But the ones down here, like how much time you save in using a motor instead of a bus or a train, the comfort, safety, absolutely. And click one more. Maybe, click, yep. Maybe you get a Vespa instead. What's the value of having a nicer scooter, right? This is up to you. This is not the market, this is you. So this is market price, and then this is subjective, okay? This one would be more welfare value. So let's go to a coral reef next. So coral reef, you have, or mangrove, you have fish habitat, you have coastal protection, you have recreational opportunities, ecosystem services. This is exchange. We can live here. Next. But this one, your emotional value or your willingness to do something, the existence. In this framework, we don't value this because there's no market. And so there's a time and a place, of course, where we could consider putting money on this one. But for accounting, no, we do not. So next. So one more. When do we use these values? So we already know there's mangroves, maybe there's exchange values, there's welfare values, and you have to make a decision. I have to remove the mangroves because I need a seawall, for example. Next. You have to think about, is the coastal protection provided by the mangroves enough? Or maybe you need a formal seawall, and then you make that choice. That's when you can put everything together. But only measuring coastal protection in accounting, yep, we don't use welfare values. Next. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. This one is coral, but you can use it exactly the same for mangroves. So next, one more. I will keep saying this for the whole talk, but sometimes we don't have to put into monetary value. We don't have to put into rupiah. So many of the insights, again, when we stay with physical value. But if you really must, for our university colleagues, this is the standard for the monetary value from the UN, and then one click. So the method depends on your purpose, the amount of data, and the capacity. So in this book, there's different tiers. Maybe tier 3, little data, you have to do this very fast. And then tier 1, you need 2 years, a team of 10 people, and a lot of money. It really depends on the situation. But everything in this book is exchange. Next. So, I'm going to give you just one example, and this is for mangrove and coastal protection. So what we do is we look at, for example, the areas that need protection. We look at the cost to build a seawall instead of the mangrove, called replacement cost. And then we look at how many areas of the coast, and then calculate the amount per year. So you can see here, we have to look at the specific coastline. We can't apply this to all of Riau. Yeah? Next. So this is an example of coral reefs providing protection to islands. And this happens to be the Maldives. You can see in blue, there's no houses. So remember from before, if there's nothing to protect, there is no coastal protection. But here, in red and green, these are the houses and infrastructure. So we find where there needs to be protection, what is the cost of the seawall, and we look at the replacement cost. If this coral disappears, what is the damage or the replacement here for a seawall? But you can see it's spatial. I don't take one value and multiply by all of the island. It's only when there's houses to be protected. So you can see accounting, we need GIS, we need economists, we need a lot of different skills. Next. We have to remember, these are public asset, coral, mangrove, public. But sometimes the private sector benefits as well. So in Maldives, all of the tourist islands, they also get protection from the coral. So how much protection? And then also thinking, how much finance can we start working in? So for coral bonds and so on. Next. And what you can do is look at the difference in benefit between stakeholders. So there's the resort islands in the Maldives, and there's also the local islands. You can see in the local islands a lot more buildings being protected, and then how many kilometers of coastline is being protected, and then just as an example, how much benefit per year are you getting from the coral? You can do this for mangrove, you can do this for many different ecosystems. You could do per island. It's really trying just to answer the question, the challenge that you have. So next, last one. These are the key messages just from the last hour. One, we remember that ecosystems, they do more than one thing for us. They do many things. And so we need to understand these relationships spatially. Two, one big number is not as useful as change over time. We need to look at the change. And that's when it becomes useful. And last is that we need standards so that we can compare. If you use ocean accounting in Riau, you can compare all the way to West Papua. If you use welfare, you cannot compare even within Riau. It is not standard. Okay? So, I think one more. That's it for this session.